My very first memory of prayer is of my grandmother, whom we fondly call Mama. Mama was known in our community on the island of St. Lucia as Mahari. One day, my dad, who was visiting from abroad, told my mom that he was going to take me to spend the weekend with his mom, my grandmother. I was only 3 years at the time, and that one weekend lasted my entire childhood and into my early adult life until Mama passed away, and then I was on my own. My grandmother was a strong woman. She was a woman of prayer and much faith. She was a woman who depended on God. She was the matriarch of our family and worked single-handedly with God, of course, to provide for us. And as she would readily share, it was only through His help and guidance that she was able to do all of these things. We never had any lack because Mama depended on God to take care of her, and in turn, she took care of us. And that is my first example of seeing what the power of prayer looks like because of Mama and her relationship with God, because of Mama and her prayer life. I can still recall our early morning worship sessions every day, which Mama facilitated before she left for work. I remember her markings in her Bibles and other spiritual books, and in fact, each of us, that's my cousins and I, who grew up together as sisters, had our own personal copies of the books that we used for worship. I remember specifically one of Mama's prayer books. It was a red hardcover book with a gold cross in the front that she had bought from a Catholic bookstore. And in that book, there were prayers for specific situations in life and so on. It's amazing because now I'm an author who writes specifically on the topic of prayer, helping others to know how to connect with God more meaningfully. Apparently, my grandmother's legacy continues to impact my life. You see, for 9 years after graduating from high school, I worked while I saw my friends leave home to study. Others returned home to work while others continued in their higher levels of study. I too desired to do great things with my life, such as go off to college, like most of my friends did, but I did not have the means to make it happen. I had a good job at a bank as an administrative assistant, but I still was unable to apply for a loan because I did not have anyone to guarantee it for me. I remember specifically one Sunday morning waking up, feeling totally led by God to make my way to college. I called a friend who's my personal friend who's also like a spiritual mom to me, and she began to praise God over the phone. I remember the following day sharing with another friend of mine the desire to head to college based on my feelings the previous day, and saying to him how fearful I was of going to college. And he looked at me and he said, "Nadine Joseph, afraid of failure?" That is when I made a decision to hold on to the rich legacy of my grandmother and step out in faith, just as I had seen my grandmother do so many times in her life while I was living with her. I left my stable, well-paying job and headed off to college on the island of Trinidad, which was just enough. The funds that I had was just enough to take care of tuition and other expenses for 1 year. I finished off my undergrad degree, graduating magna cum laude, and with much experience serving as president of the student body, president of the honor society, and as chaplain and other positions in clubs and other groups. And I did not know what I was going to do next. I was working once again and made an arrangement with the finance department at my university to deduct half of my salary toward the tuition of my master's program for 2 years until my program was complete. Again, I graduated magna cum laude. I was working again, and God led me to a school that I should attend to enroll in my PhD program. It was now not just another island that I had to move to, but a different country on a totally different continent. I resigned my job, which I enjoyed very much, by the way, left behind wonderful friends, and began to give away my personal belongings while packing some of it to take away with me to Asia, halfway across the world to the Philippines, actually literally 24 hours away by flight. I had no idea how I would pay for the ticket to get there, much less how I would pay for the tuition and other living expenses. But I was making the move because I knew that God was leading and that He would provide. I eventually got assistance for tuition, but I had to depend on Him for everything else. You see, at each juncture of my academic journey, I realized that I did not have the funds to make it happen. But I did not allow the lack of funds, to hold me back. Instead, I stepped out in faith and trusted God to supply all my needs. It's not as easy as I'm saying it, because I literally had to be very prayerful and very intentional about my dependence on God. I have since learned that through my grandmother's example and through my own personal experiences, that money is never a hindrance or barrier to do anything in life. What one needs instead is faith to step out and a mind that is willing to believe that all is possible with God. Prayer has been the avenue through which I have been able to live a life much greater than I had imagined for myself. Now I get to travel the world as an international Christian speaker, and I've had the opportunity to speak with thousands in over 60 countries, just helping them to develop a more meaningful relationship with God, teaching them how to live their wow life now. I am now recognized as a leading expert on the topic of prayer. Imagine a girl like me from the small island of St. Lucia who answered God's call, now able to share on the power of prayer and traveling all over the world doing just that. Now I get to empower, inspire, and liberate thousands of women to break through indoctrinations and the mentally constructed glass ceiling, to step out in faith and through the invisible walls and structures that set barriers in their way and also set barriers in their advancement, to wake up to realize their God-given potential and purpose and make their unique impact on the world by living their wow life now. And so I am privileged to be able to live out the legacy of a woman who raised me, the woman who was an example of the possibilities that are yours or at your fingertips when you understand that when you connect with God, when you align yourself with His will, you can live your best life, which is what I call your wow life. This is my story.